Welcome to Modus Cafe. Join us for fun, lighthearted, and educational conversations around training, athletic longevity, and the human side of climbing. With your hosts, Mercedes Pollmeyer and Katja Dev. All right, welcome to today's episode of Modus Cafe. We're going to be doing a whole episode on how to get your first pull-up, or maybe your 10th pull-up. I find that this is a topic that comes up a lot, especially as climbers, where, do we need the pull-up? How many pull-ups do I need to do in order to be a good climber? And is it even useful for general health and fitness? And so I want to answer some of those questions, as well as give you a good protocol that you can start doing on your own after this podcast. I also have a free intro course on how to get your first pull-up, and I will link that below. And if you want some coaching on your journey to getting your first pull-up, I am going to be doing our Pulling Strong course again, and this is going to be coached. So that means you're going to get coaching calls, you can submit video. So we're going to be releasing that very, very shortly. And, I highly recommend it. We've had hundreds of students go through this course and really had remarkable changes. And let's just talk about two of those folks. One of the gals, she's not a climber. She's actually maybe more of an aerialist, and does a lot of handstands and things like that. I think a big takeaway for her was that being able to do a pull-up by the end of this program gave her a ton of confidence. Really, it just boosted her ability to, one, be better at aerial, but even in her handstand, she was able to have more control. And so there is a lot of crossover in the body. You don't want just to develop one set of muscles. You also want to try to develop everything around a joint that you are using. So huge congrats to her. She really put a lot of work in, and was able to get a pull-up. And I think by now she's able to do more. And then I have another client who, the pull-up was a really long journey, and, still is. She's a climber and has had kind of off and on achievements through the pull-up, first starting with the passive hang and the active hang and getting good time in those hangs. And that is really important, especially on your journey to getting a pull-up. You want to be able to master your hang position, because that develops good scapula strength. And so with her, it was really starting there, getting really good with the hang, good scapula position. And then she was able to start adding weight to her isometric position. And we're, in our program, we really do rely heavily on a 90-degree isometric to develop your strength for a pull-up. And, it took a couple months, but she was able to really load that position. And what happened was she was able to control her movement in her climbing a lot more, because she was able to really develop that strength in that position. And then, it took a couple months after that to really get close to a pull-up. She wasn't able to go from a full dead hang, but you know what? In climbing, you don't always have to pull from a complete dead hang. And if we're talking about climbing, what ideally you're using your feet to be able to get to the next hold, but being able to pull and lock off is also super important. So for her, she was able to do a pull-up from a slight bend in the scapula and in the elbows and get her chin over the bar. So that might have taken her about 6 months. And you know what? That's her journey. And some people, it will take sometimes years to develop a pull-up. And just know that if you are looking to get a pull-up and you work on it, I know that you can get it. All right. So just looking at my notes here. So what we're going to try to do first is understanding the pull-up and kind of why it's difficult to develop. And especially for women, our shoulders are just developed a little differently. We have narrower shoulders, which means that we're not going to have as much muscle bulk in the upper body. It doesn't mean we can't do pull-ups though. There's a lot of guys out there who give us shit about not being able to do pull-ups. Yeah, I know a lot of women who can do a ton of pull-ups, a ton of very heavy weighted pull-ups. It just means we might need to put a little bit more focus on developing upper body musculature. All right. So, like men also, like it depends on how you grow up. Were you encouraged to swing around on monkey bars? Were you encouraged to climb trees? Um, I think a lot of that childhood development plays a big role in what the adult body can do and what it's capable of. And, a lot of my female friends didn't really have that same upbringing. Maybe they were actually asked to not do those things because it was dangerous. And so for a lot of like women who are in their 20s and 30s, having to basically start from scratch on learning how to pull or how to be athletic. And so, like we have to keep all of these things into consideration when we make comparisons with the male counterpart. Okay. But yes, there is a physical difference. Women generally have less muscle mass, but we do have really great technique. Like we know how to move. That is kind of like an inherent thing that we have. So we can use that to our advantage. So when it comes to climbing, this is an interesting topic about like, do we need pulling strength in order to climb really hard? And I'm going to say that I know a lot of folks who climb 513. I even know a couple of folks who climb 514 who can't really do a pull-up or a good looking one for that matter. And yeah, so it means that, yeah, I don't think you do need to have a lot of upper body strength in the traditional way to be a really good rock climber. Climbers, it's all about technique and movement, and then strength does play a big role. It kind of forms the foundation. But again, it depends on how young you started climbing. And if you're getting into climbing as an older adult, strength is going to be a foundation for you. And I do believe that, yes, we're trying to be better at climbing, and we're also trying to be strong humans and have a healthy body for as long as we can. Ideally, we're climbing for as long as we want to, and that we can control our bodies for as long as we want to. So I do think that pulling strength does play a really big part, but whether we need to be pulling big numbers is another question. I don't think that there is a clear correlation to pull-up strength and max climbing grade. I think there are actually a few studies that clearly show that. But it is like, I personally believe that it's great for longevity. And there are a few studies that do show just correlation between longevity and just overall health and fitness, that if you can do a pull-up, you are likely relatively like fit, and likely be fit for a while. So yeah, I do believe in working on pull-ups and having that as a milestone. Whether you need to chase big numbers and be able to do more than like 5 or 10 pull-ups, that's another question. But I really do think if you get a pull-up, that is a great expression of the work that you've put in, the strength in your body, and even the coordination and control in your body. Okay, so now let's move on to how to build a strong pull-up. We're going to start at kind of the base level. And I've already mentioned this, where you might want to consider working on your hanging position first. So if you are very new to training, or if you're new to climbing, then you do want to get to a point where you can hang for at least a minute. I would say upwards of 2 minutes in an active or passive hang. So a passive hang is where your shoulders are fully relaxed, shoulders up to the ears, your feet are off the ground, you're gripping the bar, and you're able to do that for a minute. An active hang is where your scapula are active, your elbows are still straight, but your scapula are really doing most of the work. Your lats do have an involvement here. And when you do go into that active position, it does start to train the lat to be active. And I do like 1 minute here. So if you haven't really gotten to that stage yet, that might be kind of your first place to start. Doesn't mean you don't have to do pull-ups, but this would be a focus. It would be increasing grip strength. It increases your scapula and shoulder strength in that hang position. It can also start working on that base core strength and control. And it works on overhead flexibility. I know for me, my passive hang, I can get like 2 minutes, but after the 2 minute mark, I tend to have some issues because I lack some overhead flexibility. So that means that my tissues, my vessels are actually getting pinched and I'm getting blood flow to my hand. So that, I use the hang in order to get more flexibility in my shoulder so that I have more ability overhead. And especially for if you're a sport climber and you get pumped really easily, this could be an issue for you. You might be really compressed in the shoulder, and you could potentially benefit from some hangs. All right, so you're going to be working on active and passive hangs, trying to get to a minute. Then the next step is scapula pull-ups. I love scapula pull-ups, especially the arching scapula pull-up, because it teaches your lats to engage at the right time. So a scapula pull-up would basically be moving your scapula down toward the opposite pockets, kind of. Okay, so we're not talking about scapula back and down. We're just talking about depression. And then as you're thinking about arching into the pull-up, your scapula will naturally move closer together. And what you don't want is to pinch your scapula at the top. All right, you do want the pinch to happen more at the bottom of the scapula. And that is going to ensure that you are activating the lats. Okay, so this would form kind of your base to pull-up training: active hang, passive hang, and scapula pull-ups. For the scapula pull-ups, I like a couple sets of like 3 to 5 reps as a good warm-up. Or if you need to train this, then you have to go for higher repetition. You could have your feet on the ground in order to assist you. If you're not used to any of this kind of training, even body weight hangs and scapula pull-ups could lead to injury. And this is all about, the way that you minimize injury is to manage your intensity. And, at Modus, we are all about, training within your comfort zone, but it doesn't mean you're not going to push yourself. What we don't want is for you to suffer every session. You shouldn't feel tired at the end of your sessions. You should feel what we call snappy, like you could probably work out for at least another 30 minutes to an hour. This ensures that you're working at a moderate to challenging intensity that you can repeat every day. All right. If you can do that, if you're going to be able to train each day, that's the right intensity. All right. So we're not trying to go to burnout. Okay. So that covers the foundation. Now, the next piece, I tend to have a different opinion when it comes to this next step in the pull-up. What I tend to see in a lot of pull-up training are negatives. And that means that you're starting on a bar, your chin is over the bar, and you come down really, really slowly. And you control that eccentric or that lowering, and you're trying to go as slow as you can. I think it's a really, really good exercise, but I don't think it's a good place to start. There is a lot of studies showing that eccentrics do increase strength faster, but I tend to see overload happen too often. And that means that people are going for too high of an intensity in eccentrics because there is angle changes. All right. So at the top, you might feel really, really weak, but because you're hanging at full body weight, and now the elbows are going through a lot of unnecessarily overload. So what you don't want to do is start hurting your elbows on this eccentric. And then maybe halfway down, it's maybe even harder for you. And you might be going really fast through that one angle. So I don't like the eccentric because if you're not a trained person, if you don't know how to control the pulling motion, then the eccentrics could actually be worse for you in the long run. So instead, I prefer isometrics. And what's great about isometrics is that you can gain strength even at lower intensities, which is great news for us. So I really like to start off with a 90-degree hang from a bar. And what that means is pulling up to a point where you're 90 degrees in the elbow and your hands are about shoulder width. Okay, whatever feels comfortable for your shoulders. You don't have to go super wide or super narrow, just whatever feels comfortable. And this 90-degree position is great because it's basically the halfway point. And in isometrics, when you're holding that position, you're going to increase strength above and below that angle, roughly 15 degrees above and below. It's awesome. Okay. So we get a lot done with a very simple position. And you don't have to do this body weight. You could have your feet on the ground and be at a point where you are still trying really, really hard. Okay. But there's really no risk of hurting yourself because it's basically self-regulated. If you fail, that's it. You can't hold it. Your feet are on the ground and you're good. You're not going to all of a sudden drop down onto your shoulders. You can also weight this. You can add a lot of weight. Once you start getting really comfortable, start adding weight to a point where it's really, really challenging. And so what we want for a rep and set scheme, I like about 3 sets of 8 to 10 seconds, and you want to be maybe 3 to 4 seconds away from failure. So if you were going to hang for 14 seconds, you would fail at that point, but you're going to stop that hang at 8 or 10 seconds. All right. And you might need to figure that out. You can. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Again, like you will find out pretty quickly, like how long you can hang for and at what intensity. And again, keep your feet on the ground if you need to, or add weight. So 3 sets, 8 to 10 seconds with a failure window of 3 to 4 seconds. The intensity can sometimes be, you could be misguided by the intensity. You do want to be at a point where you're shaking. All right. It doesn't mean that you're failing. All right. Shaking is good. It means you're trying really, really hard. And when you get to that point, you're recruiting more and more muscle. All right. So kind of get used to pushing it and trying really hard, but try to stay away from that failure point. All right. This ensures that we have enough energy in the tank for our next session. All right. So that was the 90-degree position. I also love the 120-degree, or you could be a little bit more open from that. So if you hang from a 90-degree position, just lower down so that your elbow opens up a little bit more. Now, for most people, this is going to feel harder. For those who can weight this, they often report, oh yeah, I can't weight the 120 as much. For some other people, actually, they have told me that their 120 position is actually a lot stronger than their 90 position. And that makes a lot more sense because if you think about like leverage at 90 degrees, you're basically at the point of where you have the most mechanical disadvantage. Okay, so 120 degrees in the elbow, you could be a little bit more open if you like. And again, 3 sets of 8 to 10 seconds, loading that up to a point where you are challenged, 3 to 4 seconds left in the tank. All right, so that kind of forms the strength foundation. Really, like if you can just work these 2 positions and milk as much as you can out of these positions, and some people will be able to see progress week to week or session to session over 8 to 12 weeks. If you are highly trained, you might not see as much of an improvement, and so you might plateau or stall out after about 6 weeks. But don't let the plateau stop you. Sometimes, I'd give it a couple more sessions to kind of let your nervous system adapt to those positions, and then you might be able to increase weight again. So I think that the isometrics are a really safe way to train the pull-up, and it's very climbing specific, and it's easier to recover from because you're not working a dynamic motion. All right. So that to me is kind of the secret to pull-up training, working those positions. I don't have max lockoffs in our program because it's just too much for the elbows. Unless you are really, 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 really good and you don't overload it, like you really assist in that top position and you really focus on good shoulder position, not letting your shoulders roll forward as you come up over the bar, then maybe you could introduce some of that top of the bar locking off. So one thing I do want to talk about is this arch position. So we kind of worked it in the scapula pull-up where you're working on that arch. And when you're doing a pull-up, I do like that arch at the top where your spine is arching back and your chest, basically the bottom of the scapula, is touching that bar. This is a great way to do the pull-ups because it's going to recruit the lats. All right, it's going to recruit most of the lat. In my program, we talk a lot about the hollow body position, which is really, really great for core tension. But I also think that the arching pull-up is better for climbers, just generally, and you get more lat recruitment. Okay, so we will be working on the hollow body as well as some of this arching position in the Pulling Strong program. Okay, so after the isometrics, you know, like I would say, again, like minimum 6 weeks. In our program, we do 6 weeks of isometrics, and then we start to layer in some eccentrics, the common things that you tend to see in pull-up training. The one thing that I do love about our program, and what I will say now, like what you could try at the end after doing at least 6 weeks of the isometrics, is explosive pull-ups. So explosive pull-ups, they really do help in recruiting explosive muscle fibers. And this can just help your body understand how to generate force. You know, and lifting slow is really, really good. It can help with building muscle. But if we're thinking about transfer of training, especially when it comes to climbing, we also want to learn how to be explosive. And the best way to be explosive is to unweight yourself. And I really like banded explosive pull-ups. So I like to use a really thick band, and it should feel so easy, like you're flying through the air when you're doing explosive pull-ups. And we keep the volume really low on this. This is, you know, like it's basically plyometric training, except plyometrics, generally you have a down component and a catch. We're not really, I'm not saying that you should do that. We do have that plyometric in our program. But just to train the explosive component, you want to keep it really low because quality of movement is really, really important. So I like 3 sets of 2 to 3 explosive pull-ups with a lot of rest in between. Okay, so try that at the end of a 6-week phase, you know, maybe even 8 weeks, and do a couple weeks of explosive pull-ups just once a week. And just you'll notice how it changes your pull-up. When you go to testing your pull-up, you're going to feel very different in the recruitment of that. You know, like the explosive pull-ups really do help your coordination as well. All right, so let's talk about band-assisted pull-ups. I don't love them, but I think they can be useful for folks who don't have any other options. So in your first 6 weeks, you're working the isometrics. I like to do as a finisher some assisted pull-ups. And the best way to do this is with feet on the ground, so foot-assisted pull-ups, and you're assisting as much as you need through your range of motion. And again, remember we were talking about how the leverage is different depending on what angle your elbow is at or like what angle your shoulder is at. And you need different forces through that whole range of motion. And foot assisted can really help you adapt how much assistance you need through that range. So for some people, they might need less assistance at the bottom, more assistance through the middle, and then no assistance at the top. And you can do that with your feet on the ground, assisting you through that. This is actually called accommodating resistance. You can definitely look that up. There's a lot of practitioners out there that use this in order to get stronger compared to doing band assisted pull-ups. All right. And you can also apply this to other movements as well. So I do like that accommodating resistance approach. Yeah. So with the band assisted pull-ups, I noticed that it's just, it assists too much at the bottom of the pull-up. And it doesn't really give you that neurological stimulus that you need to generate good pull-ups. But again, you know what? If that's all you have, great. That's okay. Use it. It is still going to be really, really good. All right. Just make sure that you're using a band that's going to allow you to do, anywhere between 6 and 8 reps with really good form. Now, I like in terms of intensity, make sure that you're at an intensity that you can maintain the pace of the pull-up, that the pace is the same, and that your form isn't breaking or your technique isn't breaking. Once your speed starts to slow down or your technique starts to change, that means you're done. You're done with that set, just stop. Okay, it's not worth pushing through the bad positions, not because it's maybe a high risk of injury, which it could be, but that's not the reason I don't want you to do that. The reason is because you've basically maxed out, and it's going to be a lot harder to recover from if you're pushing through your bad technique. All right, so just stop when that technique starts to slow down. Okay, so that's the end of kind of like a session. So you would start with some hangs, some scapular pull-ups, working on that arch, do some isometrics, and then you can end with some higher rep pull-ups. 2 sets, 3 sets, 6 to 8. And then the last piece of that is push-ups. Don't forget to push with your pull. The stronger you're pushing, the stronger you're pulling. Just like I said in the beginning with one of our clients, her handstand was really able to get better because she was able to pull harder. So, whatever pushing exercise you can do, whether that's bench press, if that's just push-ups, whatever you can do and get some volume in, again, like maybe 2 to 3 sets of push-ups, maybe maxing out, again, stopping once you slow down or once your technique starts to fail. Or you can do bench press. I like 3 sets of 6 to 8. All right. So make sure that that is in there. You could also do overhead press on another day. So if you do 2 sessions a week, you can do bench press on one day and overhead press another. All right. So how long does it take to get a pull-up? And, again, from what I said in the beginning, everyone's journey is going to look different. I can't guarantee that you're going to get a pull-up in 6 weeks. I can't guarantee that you get a pull-up in 12 weeks or even within a year. But I do guarantee that you will get it if you keep working on it, and that you are focusing on some other strategies such as recovery and nutrition. And we kind of touched on some recovery strategies already where you can already start working on your recovery by not going to failure. This is going to make you feel fresher for your next session. Other strategies would be making sure that you're not doing multiple sessions back to back in a week. If you're a climber and you're thinking about doing pull-up training, you might have to be a little bit more strategic because climbers are already pulling a lot and you need less pull-up training overall, just to make sure that you're not overtaxing that same muscle group. And so for climbers, I would say after maybe you do a day of climbing and then the next day you can work on your pull-ups. Make sure you have a rest day and then you can go climbing again. And for most of my climbing clients, I say no more than 2 days a week of pull-up training. If you could do one session every 5 days, that's even better. So you're not quite getting 2 sessions a week, you're getting about 1.5-ish. Okay. That is better overall, especially if you're chasing that pull-up. If you're not really chasing the pull-up, but you want to do some pull-up training, once a week is wonderful. Okay. And even like once every 10 days is good. So just make sure that you are managing your climbing volume, that you're shifting your climbing sessions to allow at least a full day of recovery for your pulling muscles. You could even go up to 2 days of recovery for the pulling muscles and do something else on those other days. Go for walks, do your legs. Don't forget about your legs. We can definitely train other things on those rest days, and you don't have to just sit around. So yeah, think about your recovery strategies. And of course, nutrition plays a huge part. Protein, making sure you get enough protein. We know that more protein helps you recover. We also know that very low protein you can survive off of, but you're not going to thrive. I feel like that is the biggest argument that I hear from folks who are against protein, is that we don't need a lot of protein. Just generally. I'm like, yeah, but how are you recovering? Are you in a sport that you're required to perform? Are you feeling your best? Like if you're just someone who does a lot of cardio and doesn't really matter about, like you're not doing races and, you feel okay, great. Like if you're able to do very little protein and feel really good day in and day out, and you're able to maintain muscle mass, great, good. Keep doing whatever it is that you're doing. But I know for myself and all of my clients that, we work with, muscle mass is really important to maintain and to build, especially as we get older. It's also really important to recover from, and the timing of protein can matter. It's not as important as we thought, but we definitely want to get it every day. And, like for most of my clients, 100 grams is really difficult. So that's kind of our first step, is just trying to get at least 100 grams of protein a day, whether you're vegan, vegetarian, or, you eat meat. Try to get at least 100 grams. Okay. So that's really going to help you feel really, really good. Okay. Some things that tend to come up with pull-up training. And actually in our free course, we do have a little breakdown on this, and this is elbow pain or elbow injuries. And it's actually quite common. It's common to develop a little bit of inflammation in the elbows. And this is where you need to meet yourself where you're at. Each person is going to have a very different schedule. It depends on how much you are able to sleep and how much stress you have in your life. And again, this goes into the recovery strategies as well. But you want to make sure that you are meeting yourself where you're at. Don't chase that pull up as if it's, that it's going to change your life once you get a pull up, because it's not going to change your life, but it is going to help change your confidence. But the sooner that you get it doesn't mean it's going to be better. All right. If you really chase that and do 3 to 4 sessions a week, you are going to run into issues with your elbows, maybe your wrists, potentially even shoulders. So the elbow tendonitis is kind of the most common thing that we see. And again, if you're a climber, you really have to focus on this. You have to focus on not doing too much each week, that you're being really intentional about where you're placing these sessions, and that you're not overdoing it in the session. You have to leave those sessions feeling really good, and not exhausted at the end of each session. Okay. If you start to notice a little bit of elbow issue, like, okay, I feel a little bit of stiffness, sometimes the creakiness, stiffness, that is a first sign of elbow tendonitis. and you can start kind of like backing off on the volume, or maybe it's the intensity. Sometimes it's a combination of both. When you all of a sudden increase volume and kind of the intensity at the same time, that is a good recipe for getting some sort of tissue injury. So be really mindful about how you're approaching your pull-up training. First, maybe just work on volume where things feel pretty good. You're feeling very much in your comfort zone, and you're just slowly increasing the volume over time. And then once you feel like you're able to complete 6 sets of those isometrics, and you can do 2 sets of 6 to 8 pull-ups at the end, and you're feeling really good, then you can start to increase the intensity. All right. And I like to do at least 4 sessions of about the same intensity in the beginning, especially when I'm learning something new, and then slowly increasing the weight after that. That basically concludes the how to get your first pull-up. It is actually really simple. I think pull-up training is very, very simple. It's just that we get maybe distracted, maybe we get impatient, maybe we get disheartened that we're not making any progress. But I really do believe that the isometric strategy really does work. It works in many, many other sports, and it works in lifting as well. These isometric strategies help a lot of very, very strong lifters break into new PRs. So, trust the process. Don't get distracted. Don't think that you see a pull-up exercise and you're like, oh, I have to do that. Just stick to what is prescribed. It makes it a lot easier to just follow a program. Just write it down and say, I'm going to commit to this for at least 6 weeks. And then you can reevaluate. All right. You have to put the time in. And you also have to make sure that you're measuring your progress. Like write down some numbers, write down how you're feeling, give yourself a number between 1 and 10 on how you feel, 10 being really awesome and 1 being, I feel horrible today, and give yourself a number at the end of each session. Okay, so make sure you stick to it. Again, like maybe 2 sessions a week of this protocol, start there, and you don't have to go much more than that. And yeah, please let me know how this goes. We do have that free pull-up tutorial for you. And I'd love for you to join our Pulling Strong program. We've helped a lot of folks get their first pull-up. And we've helped actually folks get really, really heavy pull-ups as well for the things that they're doing in their sport. So yeah, we'd love to have you. So let me know if you have any questions about pull-ups. I definitely want to make sure that I answer all the questions that you have about pull-up training. All right. Thanks so much for joining me in today's episode.